My name is David Hilderman, and I've got a degree in electronic engineering, and I've been designing audio equipment for the last 24 years. But in 2020, I discovered some stuff that I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I've been lied to for my entire adult life. And after that, I discovered this, and because I've got an engineering background, there are some things I just thought, hey, maybe I can figure some of these things out numerically. So that's what I'm going to first talk about. So here I'm going to share a screen here. Okay, carbon dioxide emissions and atmospheric levels. So atmospheric carbon dioxide basics. So there's an amount in the atmosphere. In 1 year, when you add carbon dioxide to it and you take carbon dioxide away from it, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere changes. So the amount in a given year is equal to the amount in the atmosphere in the previous year, plus the amount added, sources and emissions, minus the amount absorbed, sinks and absorption. So atmospheric carbon dioxide sources and sinks. Sources are aerobic organisms and the burning of fossil fuels. Anything that utilizes carbon and combines it with oxygen for energy. That could be bacteria, animals, and fungus, or for burning fossil fuels. And sinks, things that absorb carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. Plants use water and carbon dioxide with the energy of the sun to grow and create plant biomass. In the process, carbon dioxide is absorbed and oxygen is released. And then there's oceans. So oceans take a long time to come to an equilibrium with the atmosphere. The oceans have 50 times the carbon dioxide that is in the atmosphere. If atmospheric carbon dioxide levels quickly dropped, the oceans would be a net emitter of carbon dioxide because they'd have all that stored carbon dioxide. If the oceans somehow radically increased in temperatures, they would outgas carbon dioxide and would be a net emitter. When atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are above the point of balance, the oceans will be a net sink. Now, what is a point of balance? So, atmospheric carbon dioxide before the Industrial Revolution, carbon dioxide is created by aerobic organisms and carbon dioxide is used by plants. So, the pre-industrial revolution, the world was pretty much in balance. All the carbon dioxide created by aerobic organisms was being used by plants, and carbon dioxide levels stayed around 280 parts per million for thousands of years. So it stayed in a balance. Post-industrial revolution. After the Industrial Revolution started, we started burning fossil fuels. And this graph is from Our World in Data. It shows carbon dioxide emissions, annual emissions. So this is the amount that we're adding every year to the atmosphere. This isn't a level. This isn't like an accumulated level of carbon dioxide. These are annual emissions. As you can see, it went from basically nothing in 1800 to 37 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. That's what we're putting into the atmosphere right now. So, and this is atmospheric carbon dioxide. This is measured what our atmosphere has in it, measured in a mountain in Hawaii. So the red line in this graph is the monthly averages plotted, and the black line is a rolling 12-month average of carbon dioxide. So if you zoom in on this graph for a few years, you can see that red line goes up and down every year. The reason it goes up because there's more land in the northern hemisphere than the southern hemisphere. So in the summer, in the northern hemisphere, when plants are growing, carbon dioxide levels drop. And in the winter, when they're not growing in the northern hemisphere, carbon dioxide levels go up. So if somehow you could figure out a way to wave a magic wand and have it be summer for about 10 years, carbon dioxide levels would drop down to where it was in like 1960. Because look at the rate that carbon dioxide levels drop in the summer. It's incredible. So this is the measured atmospheric carbon dioxide levels. So this is a longer term view of carbon dioxide levels on Earth, and it goes this graph goes all the way back to 800 BC, 800,000 years before the present. So going back almost a million years, carbon dioxide levels from ice cores, it's been kind of going from like 280 parts per million down to 200 parts per million, going up and down. And now we are way up here. So right now we have more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere than the world has seen in probably millions of years, like it could be 3 million years. So, ooh, scatty or no, it's amazing. It's so good. This is the only thing we know for sure that the increasing carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is doing to the planet. This isn't just good. It's so amazing that it's truly mind-boggling. Every plant on Earth grows faster today than it would have in millions of years. I mean, think about that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I have an imagination, and I just stop and think, man, like everywhere on Earth, every single planet on Earth grows faster today, like probably something like 20% faster plants grow today with the same water and sunlight and nutrients that they would have grown 200 years ago. It's absolutely, it's mind-boggling. It's so good. So yeah, and I guess in this graph, this is something you can actually find this on the NASA website. This shows everything in green shows where the Earth has gained leaf cover. Anything that's brown or red, that's where it's lost leaf cover. So most of the planets gained leaf cover, and it gained from 1982 to 2015. The Earth gained 18 million square kilometers of leaf cover. That's equivalent to taking all the plants on continental United States, multiplying it by 2, and adding it to our planet. So one of the things, so I'm going to go back. So this graph here, this is rate of emission. So this is the rate that we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This is a measurement. This is measuring the level in the atmosphere. So the atmospheric carbon dioxide is measured in parts per million. So that's the number of carbon dioxide molecules relative to all other molecules in our atmosphere. So that's measured in parts per million. Our fossil fuel emissions is measured in tons or gigatons or megatons, but it's a weight. So now how many gigatons of carbon dioxide are there in 1 part per million in the Earth's atmosphere? It turns out that there's 7.862 gigatons of carbon dioxide equals 1 part per million in our atmosphere. So now you can think of, okay, so we're adding this carbon dioxide. We're adding 37 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year into the atmosphere. What is that when you're thinking about in parts per million in the atmosphere? So this is a mass balance analysis looking at January 1st, going from 2019 to 2020. So in 2019, the Earth's atmosphere had 410.28 parts per million. And in 2020, it had 412.92 parts per million. So the difference of that is 2.64 parts per million. So that's measured on that mountain in Hawaii. The difference between carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere from 2019 to 2020 is 2.64 parts per million. And the annual emissions in 2019, so that's how much we added to the planet, 37.04 gigatons. That's equivalent to 4.71 parts per million. So the difference between these two numbers here is 2.07 parts per million. That's equivalent to 16.28 gigatons. So that's how much nature, our planet, absorbed this much carbon dioxide in that year above what we added. So the World Meteorological Organization calculates that 25% of fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions are absorbed by oceans. In 2019, 25% of 37.04 gigatons is 9.26 gigatons. So that means that 9.26 gigatons was absorbed by the oceans, and the total emissions was 16.28. So 7.02 gigatons would have been absorbed by plants. So that's how much more plant growth we're getting today than we did when the Earth was in balance, back when carbon dioxide was at 200 and whatever it is, 280 parts per million. So this is what got me started. I discovered this report. When I was studying carbon, I was studying climate like crazy in 2020, and I discovered this report from the World Meteorological Organization. And it's in the report called The State and Variations of the Greenhouse Gases in the Atmosphere. So the red line here, the squiggly red line, is the measured carbon dioxide levels for Mauna Loa. And this black line, what they plotted, was the trend expected from fossil fuel burning. So what this means is that in 1959, at the start of this red line, and they started the black line at the same time, if you just added the carbon dioxide that we were putting into the atmosphere from fossil fuel burning, you would have gotten this black line. But that's not what happens. It should be that way, but as carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere increase, nature absorbs more carbon dioxide. So the difference here is the land and ocean sinks. So that's what got me started. And I thought, well, maybe there's some like function. Is there a function? So it must be because these increasing land and ocean sinks must be a function of the level of the carbon dioxide. So I started mathematically trying to figure that out. And this is what I came up with. And it's such a simple equation. It's just so simple that I can't believe that no one's ever done this before. I mean, it's got to be somewhere. I mean, if I really am the only person to have ever tried doing this, I mean, I just can't believe it. But maybe I am. So let's, if there's any great climate scientists out there, people who have looked into this, please, give comments. I want to find out if this has ever been done before, and if I'm missing something. Maybe there's something wrong with my calculation. So this equation, I basically have two lines. I got this line and I got this line. So the first line is carbon dioxide of a year equals carbon dioxide from the previous year level. So the levels plus the emissions. That's you got like a bucket of water, you got a gallon of it, you got like a big 5-gallon bucket, you got a gallon in it, you add a cup of water, now you've got a gallon plus 1 cup, right? That's what that is. And then adding this factor, which is pre-industrial carbon dioxide levels, which is 285.8 minus the carbon dioxide level in that previous year multiplied by a constant. And that constant, I calculated it. I mean, I didn't calculate it. I fiddled with this number. I just kept experimenting with the number until I got it to fit the graph. And that number is 0.0182. So this is the effect of the increasing carbon dioxide levels. So the difference between pre-industrial carbon dioxide and today's levels of carbon dioxide multiplied by constant is how much the Earth is absorbing of carbon dioxide as a result of carbon dioxide levels that are higher. So here's a calculation example. In 1960, measured carbon dioxide was 316.91 parts per million. In 1960, annual carbon dioxide emissions. And now I got this all from Our World in Data. You can go there, you can download this data, you can get global carbon dioxide emissions. So if you want to do this yourself, and the actual numbers come out in tons, so you'll get this 9.4144 to the exponent 10, or 10 to the 9 tons. So you convert that into parts per million, take that 9.4144 times 10 to the 9, divided by 10 to the 9, and divided by 7.862. It gives 1.1975 parts per million. Okay, so this is what the emissions were in parts per million. So put those numbers in the equation, and you get 317.64 parts per million. So that's what the calculated value for 1961 is. So what I did, I started with this first carbon dioxide measurement in 1960. I used this equation just using the downloaded carbon dioxide annual emissions from Our World in Data. And I calculated it for 1961. I used this calculated number, calculated that with the emissions for 1962, and just kept going. So the only measured atmospheric carbon dioxide level that I used was the first year in 1960. And this is what I got. So this, it's hard to see the red line behind the blue line. The blue line is my calculated value. The red line behind the blue line is the actual measured carbon dioxide level. And as you can see, it tracks exactly. It's just a little bit of squiggliness to the red line underneath it, but it's incredible. So this was done for 62 years. I did this all the way up until 2022, and over 62. So that you're compounding it every year. You're taking the calculated value and then calculating a new value just based on emissions, and it tracks amazingly well. So this is the graph of the differences between the measured and the calculated. Now, I think this is kind of interesting. So the years that the carbon dioxide, the measured carbon dioxide levels is higher than the calculated, and then there's some years that are less. So I wonder, I haven't done this, but I wonder if you looked at what the weather was like during these years where the measured levels were higher than the calculated value, were they years of more forest fires? Was it a year of more droughts or something? Why is it higher? And then why is it lower here? Is this maybe because it was slightly warmer that year in big agricultural areas or something, big forest areas, and maybe they had a longer growing season? So it's kind of interesting to see if you can actually find actual weather events and things that correspond to how this graph, how the measured doesn't match the calculated. So now that you have this, now that you got this formula, that I've got this formula, now you can experiment with things. You can see, so what would happen with different carbon dioxide emission scenarios? So this is the RCP scenarios. This is what a bunch of climate scientists figured. I don't know, maybe it came from the UN. I don't know where it came from, but this is like, ooh, scary. If we do this RCP 8.5 scenario with these crazy carbon dioxide emission increases. So they're saying like in 2100, they figure there's going to be over 100 gigatons per year of carbon dioxide emissions. And they say, ooh, scary. If that happens, we're going to have 3.2 to 5.4 degrees Celsius climate change. I don't actually think, I don't think carbon dioxide has anything to do with climate, but it has a lot to do with greening the earth. So let's try this RCP 8.5. So you stick this, I got my calculations, and then after actual measurements of carbon dioxide emissions, this is with RCP 8.5 put in there, the red line. And this blue line is the calculated carbon dioxide levels in parts per million. So by 2200, if you did the RCP 8.5 scenario, carbon dioxide levels would get to 1000 parts per million. So guess what? That's what greenhouses, a lot of greenhouses do this. They want to make carbon dioxide levels higher in their greenhouses to make plants grow faster. So the entire planet would be growing like a greenhouse. This isn't a bad thing, guys. This is incredible. This is so good. So, and in the year 2100, you can calculate that there'd be 73.57 gigatons of carbon dioxide being absorbed by our planet, more than was being absorbed by a planet back before the Industrial Revolution. So that means that if what the World Meteorological Organization says continued happening, where half of the carbon dioxide would be getting absorbed in the oceans and half being used by plants, then that would mean that 36 gigatons per year more plant growth would be happening than pre-industrial times. So this thing, like, people say, oh, it'd be scary, just terrible if carbon dioxide emissions got to be like this RCP 8.5. But this is something that I put together a long time ago. You can go to Our World in Data and you can get extreme poverty graph. And the extreme poverty graph shows that in the early 1800s, only 5% were not in extreme poverty. 95% of the population was in extreme poverty in 1820. And it has gone down to 10% of the world's population in extreme poverty. Well, if you graph one minus that, if you graph the people not in extreme poverty along with carbon dioxide emissions, you get this graph. And as you can see, the use of fossil fuels and people not in extreme poverty totally correlates. The idea that they don't is ridiculous. The more fossil fuels we use, the less people are in poverty and the better it is for humanity. So this is RCP 6. This is the RCP 6 forecast that they have. And this one kind of freaks me out, because why would it drop like this? I mean, maybe another pandemic, like a real one, a really bad one, maybe a world war. How could you do that? It's possible that they think that in 2070, they're going to come up with some great technology for energy that we've never heard of before, and we start using it. But I'm skeptical of that. I hope this doesn't happen, and I don't think it's likely. So this is, so you can try other things, right? So there's 350.org is an international environmental organization addressing the climate crisis. Their stated goal is to end the use of fossil fuels and transition to renewable energy by building a global grassroots movement. They work on grassroots campaigns across the globe, leveraging people power to dismantle the influence and infrastructure of the fossil fuel industry and to power up clean systems rooted in justice. Their name, 350, is a reference to 350 parts per million, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere considered the safe limit to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. In 2021, they raised $23 million US. These emission levels would need to be what they were in 1960. So look at this graph here. So this is what carbon dioxide emissions would have to be to make it go down. And it actually wouldn't go down to 350 parts per million until the year 2200. So the 350.org figure they want global carbon dioxide levels to be 350 parts per million. Just think of it like back in 1960, the world population was 3 billion, 47% were in extreme poverty. I mean, these people don't know what they're talking about, but bottom line is they are anti-human. So these are emissions that I think could very well likely happen, and I kind of hope they happen. So in this idea that I have, carbon dioxide emissions, this is what they did since 1960. They went up, right? Well, I think carbon dioxide emissions hopefully will continue going up at the same rate until all of India and all of Africa are out of poverty. And they would continue going like this, and then they would stay there because people will not be in poverty anymore. And, more than likely, probably maybe more nuclear stuff will be happening. So we won't, because, we might run out of fossil fuels or it might be harder to get them. So this is what I think would be a reasonable scenario and a good scenario. So here's some questions to ponder. So when you do this and you look at carbon dioxide and the Earth's absorbing it and things like that, it makes me thinking about a lot of things. So here's a question to ponder. This graph is familiar to those of us who have been trying to figure out climate. It covers the Earth's history when plants with leaves existed. The carbon dioxide history is from the density of stomata on fossilized leaves. So on a leaf, if you look at a leaf, the more close together stomata are where the gases are exchanged on a plant for photosynthesis. If they're really close together, that means that carbon dioxide levels were low. If they're spaced out quite a bit, then that means the carbon dioxide levels were high. So life on Earth goes back much further before. So this only goes back to when plants had leaves. Life goes further back than that. And so if you think about the Earth before this time, before there were plants with leaves, the Earth most likely started out with an atmosphere similar to Mars and Venus, with carbon dioxide comprising about 90% of the atmosphere and no oxygen. All oxygen on Earth was created by photosynthesis. Geologists believe that atmospheric pressure was at least 50 times what it is now in the Earth's distant past. This is something I heard somebody tell me that a pterodactyl, the dinosaur pterodactyl, is a lizard, a flying lizard. But if you look at the fossils, the way that the wingspan was and stuff like that, it just doesn't seem like it could possibly fly. If you had a pterodactyl on our planet right now, this scientist said this pterodactyl would not be able to fly. The wings were not big enough unless the atmosphere was much more dense back there. I heard this one person say this. I've been looking for it. I can't find it. I heard this back in the 90s. So this is something that I think is very interesting. So where did all the carbon dioxide go? If it was 50 times, if it started off like Mars and Venus, where did it all go? Well, photosynthesis turned carbon dioxide into oxygen and plant biomass, ultimately much of it becoming fossil fuels. That reduces the atmosphere. So it starts from being a gas in the atmosphere to becoming this solid form of plant biomass. That's removing atmosphere. So you're going to have less massive atmosphere. And also, and I think the biggest one for carbon dioxide is aquatic life use carbon dioxide along with calcium to create their shell structures out of calcium carbonate. This accumulates to become limestone, and it reduces the atmosphere. I mean, all the, Haiti, all those Caribbean islands, they are all based on old coral reefs. Coral, that's all calcium carbonate. It is when coral reefs grow, it's reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the system. It's reducing it in the oceans. And if it reduces in the oceans absorb it from the atmosphere. So all these things are reducing the amount of atmosphere that we have. So is the Earth's overall cooling over millions and billions of years, is that a result of a reduction in atmosphere? So this is going back, right now we're sort of going through a cycle of ice ages. It's an ice age, and then we're out of an ice age, and we're not in an ice age. And actually, we're always in an ice age, because as long as you got ice, as long as you have permanent ice on the poles, we're in an ice age. But we're kind of in a warm part of the ice age. So this is something that we think about. I don't know. Maybe humans will figure out some way to take all that carbon dioxide from the limestone and get it back in the atmosphere. This is WECAN is the West Coast Climate Action Network. Now, they have a newsletter that goes out every week, and I signed up so I can get this newsletter because I want to figure out what are the climate activists doing around here. So from their website, it says an empowered network of over 230 organizations urgently addressing the climate emergency in BC. The West Coast Climate Action Network strives to unite the multitude of climate change organizations, groups, and initiatives in British Columbia whose members share a deep concern about the global climate emergency and who wish to see more urgent, rapid action. Okay, so this is what I'm on the mailing list, and this is what I got in the last newsletter. So number 150, they had 30 news items, and 11 of these news items come with actions, including fundraising for legal actions to sue big oil or to sue there's a company called Fortis in BC and the provincial government to sue them for like using natural gas because it's destroying our environment. And they also had 3 different training events, including 2 different week-long training camps of how to do environmental activism. And they've got things, they've got letters and things like that you can like print out and mail it to your MLA and mail it or email it to all your different levels of government. So this newsletter comes out every week. And if there's 230 organizations, I think there's probably thousands of people that get this newsletter. It comes out every week. And this is what our governments are being bombarded like continually from these people. Meanwhile, the rest of us, we're just going about our daily lives, having to pay for the more expensive gas or the more expensive fuel, just the craziness of like having to have less lanes to drive in because they're putting bike lanes, all these things. And so that's a big reason why we're getting this crazy climate emergency stuff going on in our country. So in the March 9th, 2024 email newsletter, WECAN said the following: we have created a doc titled 32 Realms of Climate Action in BC, and we invite you to write the name of your group under each realm where you are running a current initiative or campaign. So I got this document, I printed it out, and I looked at, in the first 9 initiatives, there were over 50 groups that were active in the first 9 realms, including the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome. And I wonder, how much annual funding do they have? The David Suzuki Foundation. Their annual funding is $13.9 million. The Sierra Club of Canada. So the Sierra Club of Canada is lobbying the government for climate action things. They have $913,000 of annual revenue, and the government gives them $197,000 of that. So the government's financing these same groups that are lobbying them to do this climate action. It's not very good. So I just figured, Tom, you got me in your podcast. I got to say this stuff just for the people here in BC. So sea level, this is the next thing I got to talk about. So sea level, this is the one thing, when I first discovered the stuff about climate, I mean, there's a lot of complicated stuff, about the greenhouse effect and how carbon dioxide works in the atmosphere and looking at temperature records and stuff. Well, it's kind of crazy, and it's hard to know, like, can I trust this stuff? Well, the thing about sea level is like, this is one of the biggest things that they were talking about climate change when they first started talking about it, because so much of the world lives near the ocean, like in the coast. So this is what, and the thing about the oceans are all connected. So if you look at sea level, you can figure out what's going on the whole planet. So this is the graph that really got me going. This is the sea level record in Victoria, British Columbia, where I live. It's the longest, most continuous record in Canada. And as you can see, it's not accelerating. It's rising at the same rate that it was 110 years ago. So sea level records they measure the oceans every hour. And they've been doing it. So this record here, they've been measuring the sea level in the Victoria Harbor every hour since 1910. And what's plotted here are the monthly averages. So the reason that they measure sea level every hour is because it's really important for maritime navigation. It's not like temperature. Temperature, they measure the high and the low of the day, and they take the average of that for what the average temperature was that day. I mean, they're taking more measurements now, but historical levels, historical temperatures, that's all they did. So I believe that sea level is an indication of climate. This is the longest sea level record on Earth, a maritime type record. So they were taking these, I believe they were taking these measurements hourly as well. This is in Brest, France. And as you can see, the sea level was one rate up to 1900, and then it started going up at a faster rate. Okay, so it shows it from Brest, France, Cuxhaven in Germany, same sort of thing. It was sloping up a little bit before 1900, and then at around 1900, it started going up at a different rate. And then also in the UK, this is from a story in Science Direct. It says new data reveals British sea level records dating back 200 years. And as you can see, there's an acceleration in the rate of sea level from 1890 onward. So it was one rate, and then it went up. And it's basically been a straight line since then. So I think that, and so here's more evidence that the climate changed around 1890. In 1895, that's the last time that the Thames River froze. And they used to have markets all the time on the Thames River. And so this is from a book, a Climate History by, I think the guy's name is Beringer. He says the Thames River often froze during the Little Ice Age, and markets and sporting events took place on the London ice. The last ice cover in 1895 consists of only floes pressed together. But this is a photograph of it. So that is why I think that James Hansen, when he gave his testimony in 1988, when he believed that global warming was going to be catastrophic, that the world was going to drastically warm, that you're going to have all this sea level rise. And in 1988, he said that, he was asked, well, what would New York look like in 20 years? And he said, well, the West Side Highway, which runs along the Hudson River, will be underwater. That's what he said. That's what he believed. Now, this is the New York sea level record going back to about 1855. As you can see, it's rising, but it really hasn't accelerated. It's kind of basically the same as it always has been, except for if you take a look at this, the stuff from the earliest part, it looks like it's almost straight here, and it looks like it maybe started going up more, but it wasn't a long enough record because the sea level rate of change is still only about I think it's about 1.2 millimeters per year is how much it increased. That's how much it increased back in Brest, France. Now, if on this, when you go to the NOAA website, if you click on regional scenarios, when you get the data here, there's this thing here. You can click on this regional scenarios, and in October 2021, they had this graph. So like James Hansen back in 1988, he figured sea level was going to just go like crazy. It was going to rise up a lot, and West Side High was going to be underwater in New York. In 2021, you saw this graph showing this acceleration of sea level starting in 2000. I don't know when they first came up with this stuff, but the sea level didn't do that. So if you go to that same site right now, you see this. They changed. They moved ahead in time when the acceleration is going to happen by 30 years. So just like James Hansen, it's going to happen. It never happens. The sea level right here, this is what it's been doing, and it's going to keep doing that, I think. So this is a GIF of British Columbia. So these are all the sea level records in British Columbia. And as you can see, some are rising, some are falling, but nothing's accelerating. And it's funny because a lot of them are falling. I think actually, if you looked in BC and took the average of all the sea level records in BC, I think you would probably find that overall the sea level is falling. Now, I guess one of the things that people should understand is the reason that sea level is different everywhere is not because the oceans are rising at different levels. It's because land is rising or falling. There's places where Churchill, Manitoba, there used to be, a couple of kilometers of ice on Churchill, Manitoba. And so now that ice is gone, the land is rising and sea level is falling 9 millimeters a year. So I think that's happening a little bit here in BC. I think the land is rising a little bit, But so that's why you see different rates of rising and falling sea level at different locations. But as you can see, it's pretty, there's no emergency. We don't have to worry about houses going underwater here in BC. So this is the Vancouver sea level record. It's been rising 0.55 millimeters a year for the last 110 years. Great. And yet, UBC has created what they call their Coastal Adaptation Lab. I got a post on Facebook from UBC, University of British Columbia, with this stuff, saying it's time to accept, not resist, rising sea levels. They say, so this lab, Coastal Adaptation Lab, their purpose is to come up with government policies to deal with sea level rise in BC. They say we have to accept, it says that in British Columbia, 80% of the population lives within 5 kilometers of the coast. Sea levels around BC are expected to rise 0.5 meters by 2050 and 1.2 meters by 2100, flooding coast communities. I mean, they even got artists to make a rendering of what they thought False Creek, which is downtown Vancouver, will look like with 0.5 meter of rise. It's absolutely ridiculous. So now we know when people say, oh, sea level emergency, this is what they're talking about. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is the sea level record in Victoria, plotted to, when I did this graph, I only had data to the end of 2020. Actually, yeah, I think to the end of 2020. And this is what sea level would have to do. This is the linear trend, and this is what's been happening for the last 110 years. It would have to start rising like this. So in 2020, to get to 0.5 meter of sea level rise, it would have to change from 0.76 millimeters a year to 16 millimeters a year, abruptly, immediately, to get to 0.5 meter by 2050. It's absolutely ridiculous. So here's another thing to ponder about sea level. So every year, 750. So this is, I don't know how scientists figure this, but scientists, who are they? I don't know. But they figure that, so there's going to be carbon dioxide created by natural processes, and plants are going to be using that. Scientists figure about 750 gigatons a year is created by natural processes, and that same amount is absorbed to create plant biomass. And we're actually absorbing more now because of increased atmospheric carbon dioxide, so plants are growing faster. So that is creating plant biomass. And so how much does the accumulation of this plant biomass result in the land rise, right? So that, I mean, if you look at your lawn, every year your lawn is growing, and lawn, it actually rises. So I wonder, at the NOAA website, the global average, so the absolute global sea level rise is believed to be 1.7 to 1.8 millimeters per year. So is plant biomass actually creating enough? Is it creating an equivalent amount of land rise as to the way that the sea level is rising right now? I don't know. So that's an interesting idea. And that's all, folks.
Did I miss the part about the timeline of you believing versus not believing? Was it about 2020 when you switched over?
Yeah. So this is what happened. So I had a job, and I was kind of in sort of a management type of level in a company that designed audio equipment, like music equipment. And I lost my job in December of 2019. And one of the things, because I do care about the climate, and I always try to live my life, the best to make sure I had minimal carbon footprint and stuff. And I saw all this stuff about building wind turbines and solar panels. I thought, this makes no sense. I'm an engineer. How can you replace reliable energy with this kind of crap, right? So I started researching into that, and I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Vancouver, and I said, yeah, trying to figure this out. Why aren't people going nuclear? And he goes, Dave, forget it. It's all a bunch of crap. I go, what do you mean? Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Don't you know, we're putting all this carbon into the atmosphere, and it's causing, it's going to cause warming. He says, David, listen, I'm going to send you some videos, watch them. And you're a good friend of mine. Just really take the time to watch these things. And that's when I couldn't believe it. Something different, right? And I guess the thing that kind of got me the most was the sea level, because sea level, I mean, the oceans are all connected, and there's no acceleration. So that's what got me started. And then, so I discovered that I couldn't believe it. And I was putting stuff on Facebook about this stuff. And I think I was getting a little annoying. So a brother of mine said, Dave, what's the point? Why are you putting this on Facebook? What's that going to do? I mean, what? You're going to tell your friends and family about this stuff? What's the point? I thought, he's right. Because I did a lot of research. I was probably I was probably like full-time. Like I didn't have a job. I probably for like 5 months, I was probably putting in full-time hours. And so I thought, well, maybe I can do something. So I thought, well, hey, the Conservative Party in BC, no, in Canada, right? Like these guys, they must think that this climate stuff is crap, right? No, they say no. Yeah, we gotta use technology to deal with the global warming crisis. And well, what am I going to do? Well, then there's this PPC party. Well, maybe I can help them. And the thing is, I live in the riding of Elizabeth May. She's a Green Party member of Parliament in Canada. And I voted for her, I voted for her. And so I thought, well, this is what I can do. I'll run in the election. So I ran in the federal election, and I ended up debating Elizabeth May 5 times.
So are those up on YouTube or any transcripts? I would love to see.
Yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, they're not that easy. I mean, they're just these teeny little town hall meetings, right? I can maybe find them, but the thing is, they talk about a whole pile of things, right? But Elizabeth May said that we've got to treat this climate like a crisis. We can't just do what we're doing now. We have to treat it like an emergency. She figured we should use wartime measures right now. The government should like take over businesses and force them to do climate things to like stop carbon emissions. Like it's really amazing. She totally wants communism.
Do you have any sense, as someone living in Canada right now, what % of the people think it's too warm in Canada right now and we need to cool the planet down?
Here's the thing. I see what's happening in the US, and I think it's very hopeful. Now, I think most people in Canada believe that we're in a climate emergency. Unfortunately, I really do. I think the vast majority do. And here's a little story. So I used to go to a trade show called NAM in Los Angeles every year. And after George Bush won the election the second time, in Canada, it looked like you people were absolutely insane. Like it just seemed like it was completely impossible that anyone could vote for the guy, right? Like, because we just got this stuff that made him look like this warmonger, like he had the IQ of like like nothing, right? Like that's what our media and everyone thought that. I went down to the States and I was having lunch with a guy that worked in the States, and I said, how could you guys vote for George Bush? He said, what are you talking about? We don't have a clue here. The CBC, like the media here, they are so alarmist. It's unbelievable. Like they think if somebody can somehow communicate that we're in a climate emergency, like be crying and like weeping and like, oh, no, we can't have any children anymore, they get totally elevated. This is wonderful. Thank you for giving your wonderful message. We're going to save the world. That's what's going on. Canada's really bad. So it's really hard. I mean, I think a few people are. I think the pandemic, maybe a few people, but it's pretty bad in Canada.
Do you remember which videos you might have watched there to help you come over to realism, or anybody in particular you heard speaking, anything like that?
So I started a Google Docs called Tony Heller. Yeah. And I still have it. It's about 100 pages long right now, because Tony Heller, it was warmer back in these places, like the thing about wildfires. And I think he's the one that talked about sea level. And that's when I went to the NOAA website and I started looking at hundreds of different sea level records. But Tony Heller was a big one. And then I also saw Will Happer was interviewed on on something, and just saying just about how, you paint a barn red and you paint it again, it's still just red. You can hardly tell it made any difference. And that's what carbon dioxide is doing in our atmosphere. And yet plants are growing so much faster. I just couldn't believe it, but it's the truth.
Yeah, I think Tony Heller is just fantastic. I think he just announced on Twitter that he's reached 52 million views on YouTube, something like that. He's getting a lot of people to watch his stuff, and as well he should. So I'm loving that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Any other points you'd like to make before we finish this one up?
Yeah, I think that, so globally, I I think the world uses about 2.4 kilowatts of energy per person. In Canada, we use 11 kilowatts of energy per person. That's how much energy we're using all the time. There's like almost 1 billion people that use about the same amount of energy as it uses, like your fridge uses. The world is going to continue to use fossil fuels, and they're not going to stop. China, in 1990, India has the same carbon dioxide emissions today that China had in 1990. India is increasing their carbon dioxide emissions at a faster rate than China did back in 1990. China brought 600 million people out of extreme poverty by building a couple of coal-fired power plants a week. China's going to keep doing the same thing. These things are it's going to make the world better, and it's going to get people out of poverty. It's going to help the environment because when people get out of poverty, they care about the environment. And meanwhile, us in the West are destroying the environment by covering it with wind turbines and solar farms. I mean, people that watch your podcast know this stuff already, but we got to somehow get people to understand this. And we just got to, and like, I think I just listened to another one of your podcasts this morning that we have to get people doing stuff, because if we just let the people that are ruling us, the governments, they're going to keep going in this agenda. So we have to keep fighting.
All right. Very good. On that note, we'll finish up, but thanks a lot for being part of this. I appreciate all your work and the efforts you're putting in. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right.